Good evening, guys. Can anybody hear me? I can't hear anybody's talking, so I'm wondering if is the class continuing or we waiting for someone, or is it my laptop that's got a speaker problem?
Good evening, everyone. I'm so sorry for the delay and for waiting. Just had some technical problems with my laptop, but it's all updated now and I'm ready to go. I hope you've had a wonderful day. I know it's quite cold and wet and rainy in Cape Town today, so I hope everyone is keeping warm. Okay, so welcome everyone again. I will quickly just put in the attendance register in the chat. If, as always, it's important for us to get this information so that we know who's attending and we can track and keep a good record of it. Okay, can I get just a thumbs up or a hi or something in the chat to know that everyone is here and everyone's okay and we're together? Awesome, I see a thumbs up. See in the chat, also thumbs up coming in. Great. Okay, that's two of us, so I'm going to assume everyone else is also okay, although I'm only seeing 2 thumbs up, but okay. Welcome to our session today. So this is the first year's Skills for Communication Science Facilitation workshop. I'm not going to have to go through this because I see that everyone's cameras are turned off and all the mics are muted. And we're all, I believe, at this point familiar with the process. And we know that if you do want to engage and ask a question, you can just raise your hand or you can just put something in the chat. I do encourage and really like for you all to engage with me and for us to have a wonderful discussion because these are not lectures. Once again, these are workshops, facilitation sessions, and the point is for us to co-construct meaning and to work together to try to really hone the skills that we're trying to gain from these workshops so that we can be able to better understand our material, our content, and just be better prepared for assessment time and just life beyond comms 1501 and 1502. Okay, if you do have any technical issues, you're welcome to email ctntut@unisa.ac.za and they will help you with all of that. And just a final note that we do have recordings of these sessions if you happen to miss one at any point. Okay, so sorry about that. This will be session 2 for communication sciences. The applicable modules are fundamentals of communication, communication, context, and application. Okay, so I think we're going to jump right into it. As I said, if there are any questions that come up, please let me know. Please put it in the chat. Yeah, I look forward to really engaging and for us to have a nice, very fruitful discussion. So last week we touched on what is communication. I'm so sorry, I just see a excuse me for a minute. Last week we touched on what is communication. We looked at why communication is important. So do you remember, or for those of you who were here, can you maybe tell us what you remember and what you took from last week's session? What did we say communication is? How did we define communication? You're welcome to put it in the chat. Okay, if you weren't here last week, maybe just off the top of your head, what do you think, how would you define communication, and why would you say communication is important? I see some people, typing. Okay, so as some people are typing, communication when you transfer information. Okay, so Mitch says it's when you're transferring information, and I think what I like about that definition is that it doesn't necessarily specify how, right? And so it focuses on the purpose of the communication, which is one of the things we're actually going to look at today as well. Milan says to convey a specific message via visual or sound stimuli or other means. Perfect. And that also once again captures the sort of the richness and the diversity of communication, how varied it can be, right? Because it's you're either communicating or transferring this information or this message via visual or sound or audio, visual, sound, by text. So there are different ways how we do communicate. And so what we talked about last week was that we noted different types of definitions, and we realized that the definition of communication is going to differ from person to person. And this is because communication is quite a subjective thing. I mean, yes, and so at the core of it, none of the definitions are wrong. So if I say communication is me talking to a friend, that is right. But if Mitch says communication is when you transfer information, that's also right. So we essentially would be saying the same thing. The core of what we would be saying would be the same, but maybe the ways that we'll be saying it is different. And that speaks a lot to our individuality, we as people, our backgrounds. And so that's why from sort of this definition, we went into talking about the self, because communication is a very personal thing. And so we talked about and we focused on intrapersonal communication sort of as a starting point. And we said that before you can go out and communicate with other people and build interpersonal relationships and really hone those interpersonal communication skills, it's important to start with the self, because you speak to yourself probably more than you speak to anyone else. And so we talked about sort of the self-talk that we have with ourselves, and how that shapes the way that we portray ourselves to the world. It shapes the way that we come across to people, the way that we are perceived by people, and ultimately the way we communicate, right? So it was important for us to first delve into this notion of interpersonal communication and really recognize what are the things that influence our idea of self, our self-concept. And we looked at factors such as our values and attitudes, beliefs, our culture, gender, perception of others, perception of self, and our self-concept. So all of this is going to affect the way that we communicate with ourselves, within ourselves, the way that we process information, the way that we receive information, and ultimately the way that we're going to transfer or convey information or certain messages, right? So that's how we started off, and then we sort of went into a discussion around how communication has developed over time, and you'll note that these are key themes and ideas emanating from both COM 1501 and 1502. So if you are doing both modules, you will see how you will note the overlap of skills and themes. So that is deliberate, just to put that out there. Okay, so then we looked at how communication really sort of has developed over time, and here we were then able to move from looking at interpersonal communication to interpersonal communication, and we looked at sort of how it just started from the beginning. And so I'm not sure if everyone today was in last week's session. I think Eric was, but if you can think off the top of your head, how would you say the way that we communicate has changed over time? Just if you're able to also unmute your mic and yeah, and make your point, that would also be great. I always say that I'm not particularly keen on only hearing my voice for the whole session, so it's nice to also hear other voices. So if you can, you're more than welcome to unmute your mic. We can think of even if we just think of the mediums that we've used over time as a society, how would you map that out? How would you see that taking place? Okay, Milan says one way would be through the advancement of technology. So further development of speech and language. Absolutely, I agree. And so we did look at that as well. We looked at the role that technology has had on communication. Funnily enough, maybe not so funnily enough, actually, because we are currently now in this technological age, we see very clearly how it has affected and how it affects the way that we communicate with others and with ourselves even. But if we were to sort of go back a couple of centuries, we just think about the way, or we talked about how it really started off with like print with writing, right? With yes, with writing. So I'm just trying to make sure I have the correct order of that development. Yes, so it started off with, we started off with the age of speech and writing. And this was sort of communication at its most basic form when language when language came to be and we began to understand language. Humans, of course, would then communicate orally, and that was the main way of passing information around. From there on, we moved into this age of writing where we can then take sort of the oral form and put it into writing, put it into text. And this, of course, was a great way to communicate across distances. Because orally, and I want us to think back in the day, I don't know how back in the day is for you, but I'm thinking just as far as the age, I'm not sure actually, just quite far back. I think I'm revealing my age here. So just back then when we, of course, did not have phones, and if you were not close to the person that you wanted to communicate with, we needed to find a means to communicate with them and to tell them whatever we would have wanted to tell them if they were close by. And so, of course, the age of writing letters became quite, letter writing was quite a big way of communicating, and they would transfer these letters around. And then we moved from sort of as society began to evolve into this more industrialized society, we began seeing the rise of the age of print. And print, of course, being this idea, or leading into this idea of sort of mass communication, right? That's where we started seeing the concept of one piece of writing or one piece of text or communication message being conveyed to many people at once, right? So newspapers, the same newspaper with the same text was then distributed to many communities, magazines and books. And so we started seeing more formalized forms of communication. I'm so sorry. And then we move into this electronic mass media, which was, again, this concept of sending out one message to many, many people. And here we're looking at TV, so like news broadcasts, we look at radio, using electronic means to communicate to the masses. So one message going out to many people. And if you think of this particular age of communication, you see that there wasn't a lot of reciprocity in this form of communication, right? So it's not that we could watch TV and actually engage or interact with what we were watching, or interact with what we were listening to on the radio. That's changed drastically with the information age, which is now the internet, and I think what the internet has done is provided us this platform or this medium to extend this notion of mass media, mass communication from, yes, mass communication. So now, yes, we can listen to the radio and we know it's been transmitted across the country, but we are also able to engage with the radio presenters, right? We see more recently now, you have radio stations having WhatsApp lines. I mean, previously it was, you could phone in, so you could phone into the radio, you could actually participate in the conversation that they're having. So it wasn't anymore just a one-way communication stream, but it became two-way. Now, of course, it's a lot easier. I hear that it's WhatsApp. So the radio station will have a WhatsApp line, and you can send voice notes. So every time in the mornings when I'm driving, then I hear people sending in their voice notes, and this is their way of course, they're engaging not just with the radio presenter on whatever topic is being discussed, but now they're also engaging with the rest of the country. And so it almost puts this power of mass communication in the hands of everyday people. And this is how technology, of course, has changed, or one of the many, many ways that technology has changed the way that we communicate. So it has this mass communication element, but also this personal, interpersonal communication element where you have easier access to someone. So you can just text them. Of course, we talked about social media, we talked about like WhatsApp and instant messaging and emails, and how you can easily just communicate with the other person without them being close to you, and within maybe a minute or so they will, immediately they'll receive your message and they can engage with you back. And so communication doesn't rely on proximity anymore. We don't need to be close to one another, and we don't need to wait. So it has solved the problems of distance and time, because if you think about the writing age, where yes, you could communicate with someone who wasn't close to you, but it took a while for that letter to reach them. And now you can communicate to someone who's not close to you, who's in a different continent even, and they receive that message instantly. So the way that we are communicating has really changed, has really evolved, and as a result, it sort of requires us to also adapt and accordingly, and to be able to get the relevant skills to shift with the times, essentially. This is, of course, not something that we're trying to teach here. It's not necessarily something that is taught. As humans, we tend to evolve with the times. It's sort of quite easy for us to adapt to the situation. So we tend to evolve and move along with the time. So yeah, this of course just sort of happens automatically. Are there any questions at this point? Any comments? Anything that you've realized during the little recap, or anything that you would like to also raise pertaining to the way that communication has evolved, or even just about what I talked about around intrapersonal communication and how that is really the starting point for effective communication? Okay, I'm going to take the silence as that we're all good and we're all happy with that. Okay, so now that we've looked at sort of what communication is, we can start to look at why do we communicate. So what is the basic purpose of communication? Just off the top of your head, what would you say is the purpose of it? So Mitch, you had said that communication is when you transfer information, but why are we transferring this information? Okay, to pass on a message or information, but why? Why would I want to pass on a message? Or maybe give us an example of a type of message and why you'd want to pass on that type of information or message. Okay, to get a response or an answer. Okay, these are not wrong. These are not wrong. Yes, I think we're wanting to really get to the core of it, and as you'll see on the slide, we say it is to satisfy a need. So in one of our texts, we're given an example of, say you win the lotto, right? What's the first thing you would do if you win the lotto? I know what I would do if I were to win the lotto. But what is sort of the first reaction, the first human reaction when you hear something like you have won, you got the winning numbers, you're now a millionaire? I'm sure we've all thought about what we would do if we won the lotto or became millionaires overnight. Okay, I thought someone was typing, but okay, maybe not. Right, so I mean, ultimately, what I would firstly have this internal dialogue with myself, right? Because I can't believe it, so I'm trying to process it, and that's that interpersonal communication. So I'm like, oh my gosh, is this real? Have I really won? You're trying to sort of make it make sense for yourself. And then once you've sort of gotten through that initial shock and talked through it with yourself, generally we would want to tell someone else. We would want to call someone and share the news with someone else. And so you see how with every sort of communicative act, we move from intra to interpersonal. So first I'm like talking it through with myself, I'm trying to process it, and then I'm wanting to share it with someone. That's that interpersonal communication. And so essentially, yes, this shows us the basic purpose of communication, which is to satisfy a need. So what kind of needs do humans have? We have a number of needs. We have a need for warmth, for shelter, especially now in winter. Warmth is important. We want to be in a safe place. We have a need for clothes and food and to feel valued and to feel safe. So to feel loved and that we belong and that we have good health, etc., right? So these are all human needs that we have. And so essentially, how do you then make it known what your needs are? Through communication, right? So if I need food, I'm going to need to communicate, or if I was a child, perhaps, if a child needs food, they're going to have to communicate to the mother that they're hungry, right? So the purpose of that communication is to fulfill the need for food, right? The purpose for when you share good news with a friend of yours is to fulfill this need for friendship, for love, for intimacy, right? For the sense of connection. So there's always that deeper, our communication needs are communication acts always connected to a need, a human need. We can even move it a bit beyond, a bit out of the more core human needs and think about even in a classroom, right? So if you're in class, you have a lecturer, you're communicating with your lecturer, for example. What would the need be there? Can we try to delve a little bit into that one? What would the need be in maybe a classroom setting? What need is being communicated there? Okay, I'll give it a try. So essentially, if you're in a classroom settings, the communication there is, of course, passing on of information, right? But what is the purpose of getting that information? Ultimately, you want to have that information, or the information that is being presented to you will lead to your better understanding of your material so that you can do well in your assessment, so that you can pass that degree or that module, so you can get the degree, so that you can get a job, so that you can fulfill your needs for food and water and shelter and security and all that things. So you see how really everything goes right back to these core to these core human needs. And so we're presented with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is a framework that stipulates that essentially humans go from, or humans are motivated by their most basic needs. So everything that we do is us trying to work up this pyramid of needs. So at the most basic level is our need for, is our physiological needs. So the need for air, water, food, shelter, sleep, clothing, reproduction. Once those needs have been fulfilled, then we can start thinking about the next level in the triangle, your safety needs, so personal security, employment, resources, health, property. Once those needs have been fulfilled, then you can start thinking about friendship and intimacy and family, sense of connection. And ultimately, the goal is to get to this point of self-actualization, which is really to become the most, to meet your highest potential, to fulfill your highest need, which is just this need of self-actualization. So I want us to just think about in the context of someone who is really struggling, and I want us to connect this to communication, because this is where I'm trying to go with this. Someone who is living on the street, most likely the things that they're going to come up to you and talk to you about are going to be related to their basic physiological needs, because they don't have food. That is usually what, like, their core focus is going to be on. How can I get food? Where am I going to sleep tonight? How can I get clothes? So that at the core level, they haven't been able to fulfill these physiological needs. And so their lives are essentially centered around trying to fulfill this. Once you fulfill this, once you know that you have a steady, you know what you're going to eat every night, you have a place to sleep, you can start thinking about, okay, how do I now get employment so I can maintain what I have, right? How do I make sure that I'm in good health so that I can go to work? How do I ensure that I'm safe? But someone who is who doesn't have a place to sleep or who doesn't have food is most likely not going to be thinking about intimacy and friendship. I mean, it would be there because we're human, but what the theory says is that at the core level, they're not going to be able to really start thinking about those things because the basic needs haven't been met. So the relationships will be strained because you can't pour yourself into a relationship or friendship or intimacy when you're hungry or when you don't have clothes, or your focus is going to be primarily on that. So yeah, essentially he believes that these needs determine our behavior and ultimately the way that we not just interact and communicate with ourselves, but also with the world around us. And the success of the communication is then determined on how well one progresses through these steps. So it's not always, I mean, like, it's a framework that's been used. It's not necessarily like a one size fits all. And it has sort of been, it has been criticized because of like context, the needs of people look very different across, but I would say that sort of at a human level, despite cultural background, at a human level, we all like, before I start thinking about wanting to make a change in the world, I need to ensure that I have food and I have shelter and that I'm safe and I have clothes. Otherwise, there's no way I can start thinking at a higher level of self-actualization or start thinking about recognition, or I want to be seen as this person, or I want to be respected in society when, you know, I'm starving. So essentially that is the framework that has been presented to us around the why of communication. So yeah, essentially the physiological needs are the most basic needs. Like I said, if you have food every day, then you won't you won't be thinking about food. You can sort of start thinking about the next thing. Do you have a job? Is your job safe? Do you have health insurance? And go up the triangle in that way. Okay. So would you say that this mode of looking at the why of communication is effective? Are we still here? Okay, it's quiet. I'm just going to assume that we are still here. Okay. And so from now that we've sort of looked at the core needs of the core human needs which drive our communication, we start to look at the various types of interpersonal communication. This is again just leading on from our discussion last week around interpersonal communication. So we know from last week that interpersonal communication is about the communication with self and their self-concept and relates to self-esteem and how you relate to the world essentially. And then we said that interpersonal communication, of course, is how you all relate to and with others. So there are different types of interpersonal relationships that we have that were identified. It is the I-you relationship, and for the COM 1502 students, you can find this in your study guide. I'm just going to touch on it briefly. The I-you relationship essentially is a mutual one. So the two people involved, and it can be, of course, more than two people, but the two people involved see it, and they treat each other as people. So these are very, like I said, mutual. So it's more equal relationships, so friends, partners, romantic partners, siblings. Yeah, so you see each other as human. You can, and they can share their feelings, their convictions, their desires and opinions with each other, and sort of take the other person's opinions into consideration also. So there is a bit of distance between the two people, but they do respect each other as individuals. And usually this is the type of relationship that leads to authentic and really deep relationships. So, and this would fulfill, these types of relationships would fulfill the, let me go back, would fulfill the third level of relationship. Oh, sorry, the third level of the human needs. And then we have the I-it relationship, which is, if you just think of I-you, it's like me and you, we're seeing each other. And then I and it. It isn't a human. It is not a person. It is an object. So in this type of relationship, the one person doesn't necessarily see the other person as human, as at equal level, but more as, I don't want to say object, but more as a means to an end, right? So if you think of a boss and an employee, of course they see each other as, you do see each other as human, but you see your boss essentially is a means for you. It's like, okay, I have to have a good relationship with my boss, because he pays my salary, and then the salary is what allows me to feed my children and feed myself and keep a roof over my head, right? And likewise, the boss sees you, the employer, as, yes, you're human, but also you are going to help, or you being here means that my business can make more money, that I can, fulfill the goals that I have, etc., etc. So you see the differences between the I-you relationship and the I-it relationship. So essentially, in the I-it relationship, one person doesn't really consider the other person fully, and it's more about kind of your personal gain and what you can get out of the relationship. We do also have relationships like this with friends, but yeah, usually it's in the context where there is some sort of power dynamic. So even a student and a lecturer, the student's like, well, I need to pass this lecturer's course so that I can graduate, so that I can do this and I can do that, right? The lecturer, of course, sees the student as human and cares for the growth of that student, but generally it's part of their job, so they have to help the student, right? So we're not saying, I think what it sounds now is that the I-it relationship is a bad relationship. It's not necessarily a bad relationship, it's just a different type of relationship. And we really can't avoid these types of I-it relationships, because it's not everyone that you communicate with, not everyone that you come across in your life that you would have an equal or mutual relationship with. Also, I don't know if we all have the mental and emotional bandwidth to have very close relationships with everyone that we meet. So we probably have a small group of I-you relationships, and then a larger group of I-it relationships. So your relationship with your mechanic would be an I-it relationship, right? Yeah, so that's just an example there. So you can't avoid it, but we can decide to still bring in a little bit of value into the relationship, because ultimately it is another person that you're communicating with, and that relationship is important, even though it's not important. it's not an intimate relationship like an IU relationship. If your mechanic decides now that they don't want to service your car anymore, yes, you can find another mechanic, but it is going to inconvenience you a bit, right? Because I mean, personally, I know how hard it is to find a good mechanic. So you want to still maintain those good relationships, still be mindful, or we still want to be mindful of the ways that we communicate and the ways that we come across in these interactions with people that we consider to have I-it relationships with as well. So what are the things that informs your relationships? So now I'm thinking in terms of what we just discussed. Oh, sorry, I see a hand. Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. I was just wanting to know, is it possible to have an I-it relationship and okay, I'm confused. It's an I-it and it's an
You.
you. Is it
Yeah.
possible to have both of them at the same time? Like if we look at your boss, the boss and employee, is it possible for the boss to be the boss, and then still have a relationship where, if it makes sense what I'm asking?
It does. It does. I think it is possible, but it's going to be mostly one or the other. So
Okay.
it wouldn't be an equal I-it, IU. So it would maybe
Okay.
start off primarily as I-it, and then over time, as the relationship develops, it becomes IU to a certain extent. But because of those power dynamics, it's still going to be an I-it. It's just maybe a more meaningful I-it.
Okay. Okay. Thank you so much.
Sure. Thanks for the question. Okay, cool. So I'm looking at time, and I'm going to go over into self-disclosure, interpersonal communication and self-disclosure, because this is also one of the things that informs, sorry, I did ask the question, what informs your relationships, but maybe that's just something we can think about in the back of our minds. So self-disclosure is one of those things that are going to inform how well you're able to develop a relationship, how deep or how meaningful a relationship will be with a particular person. So self-disclosure has to do with the amount of personal information you reveal about yourself. So the closer your relationship is with the person that you're communicating with, the more information you'll disclose. So we can again think about the I-it and IU relationships here. So for example, a colleague, you won't tell a colleague about your financial problems. That is, a colleague relationship is more I-it as well. You sort of just have to work together. But you will share this information with maybe your partner or your sister or your brother, right? Because of the type of relationship that you have. So how much we share, of course, how much we communicate, and the depth at which we communicate depends on the type of relationship that we do have with certain people. Yeah, and I wanted us to maybe watch a quick video around this, the interpersonal communication and self-disclosure, and then we'll chat through this theory called the Johari window theory after that. So I'm just going to quickly share my screen, or reshare my screen with sound. Sorry for the noise. I don't know if you can hear that in the background. Okay, so please let me know if you can hear the sound.
Hello everyone, and welcome to our third session.
Can you hear the
We'll
sound?
be focusing on the self and other.
Thumbs up, thumbs down. Sound is good. Awesome.
As it pertains to effective communication. Focusing on the self. Hello everyone, and welcome to our third session, where we will be focusing on the self and other as it pertains to effective communication. No course on effective communication would ever be able to leave out this topic. Why? Because in every single act of communication, the self and at least one other is involved. Yes, most study psychology to understand why other people think, feel, and act the way they do. But something you may not know is that when we study psychology, we always start with ourselves. We need to look in the mirror and apply what we learn to ourselves before we can expect other people to apply it to themselves. So be prepared to learn a lot about yourself in this module and many others along the way. I would go so far as to say that after a number of years of psychology studies, you are unlikely to walk away the same person you were when you started. All effective communication begins with knowing oneself through self-knowledge, self-awareness, and self-understanding, which is why we are focusing on the self in this session. One of my favorite theories related to self-awareness is Johari's window theory. It provides an excellent graphic representation of the relationship between individuals and understanding oneself. It is called a window because of its 4 quadrants. The window refers to a person's feelings, experiences, views, attitudes, skills, intentions, motivations, etc., their knowledge of this information, and their disclosure thereof to others. This may sound a bit confusing, but stick with me. Each of the quads has a different name. Open self, blind self, hidden self, and unknown. And over here, it refers to the self and other. What is known by a person about themselves and is also known by others is represented by the open self. The type of information included here is safe information that you would be comfortable with others knowing. This could include things like your name, your hair color, what soccer team you support, what you are studying, how many siblings you have, where you grew up, and so on. This information is considered safe. This is the type of information you would readily say, for example, in the class forum during week 1, where everyone is making their introductions. What a person knows about themselves and others do not is represented by the hidden self. This could include things like your insecurities, your political views, stereotypes you may hold, etc. Why do we choose not to disclose this information readily? Usually due to fear. Fear of what? Fear of being rejected, being misunderstood, having information disclosed or made public, or having our disclosures used against us. What is unknown to a person about themselves, but is known to others, is represented by the blind self. You may think this sounds strange, but have you ever had someone point out something to you about yourself that you didn't know? This is an example of information from your blind self. For a silly example, you may be told that you nervously tap your pen during a test, but you were completely oblivious to this. Or it could be a lot more serious. You might be told by a colleague that your team finds you very aggressive in your management style, and you may have had no idea that you came across like this. This window becomes smaller and smaller as we open ourselves up to feedback from others. The last quad represents what neither a person knows about themselves nor do others. This is a bit of a tricky quadrant and usually refers to unconscious material, but could also include something like an unknown skill or talent that is yet to emerge. Something else to note about this model is that the size of the various windows gets bigger and smaller when other windows change in size. For example, the more feedback I take on board, the smaller my blind self becomes and the bigger my open self gets. Hopefully this makes sense. Have another read of this section in your textbook to be sure you fully grasp this useful model. Self-disclosure is an important topic relating to the self in communication. One of the most difficult factors in self-disclosure is knowing whether or not to self-disclose in certain instances. I'm going to give you a few scenarios, and I want you to consider whether or not self-disclosure would be appropriate. Mark wants to end his relationship with his girlfriend. He is overseas and has met someone else he is interested in and has started seeing her. He will be returning shortly, but he wants to break up with his current girlfriend over the phone and tell her that he has met someone else. A mother of 2 teenage children, one a boy and one a girl, has been feeling guilty because of an affair she had many years ago while her husband was working outside of the country. They have worked through their affair and are now happily married. Her husband is no longer working away from home. She wants to now confess the affair to her children to relieve her guilt. Jason is gay and has been having a relationship with another man for the past few months. He has never had the courage to share this with his parents. They are all going away on a family holiday and will be together for the first time in years. Jason plans on sharing the information regarding his sexuality to all of them on the trip. Now, I'm not going to give you answers to the above, and the answers aren't always as black and white as one might think, but I want to give you some situations to consider so that you can decide whether it would be appropriate or not, and more importantly, why. To help you, I'm going to finish off by sharing some guidelines for self-disclosure. Firstly, consider the motivation behind self-disclosing. Also, consider whether the self-disclosure is appropriate to the situation. Weigh up if this is the appropriate opportunity for honest and open responses. Consider whether the person is also disclosing. Determine whether your self-disclosure will impose any possible unrealistic burdens on the other. I think I've given you enough food for thought today, so I'm going to leave it there for now. Until next time, bye-bye.
Okay, so I hope we all were able to follow. I'm just going to run through what the Johari window again and just make sure we're sort of all on the same page. So, of course, with self-disclosure, we know it's about how much information or how much personal information we're revealing about ourselves. And we said, of course, how much we're going to reveal generally depends on the level of the type of relationship that we have with that person. And so the Johari window provides us sort of this model that tries to illustrate the self-disclosure. So the window basically represents yourself, and includes everything about you. So some of the even things that you don't know. And of course, when we try to do these activities, if it's something you don't know, of course, you're not going to fill in that block. I would have liked for us to try that, but I'm just looking at time, and maybe it's something you can do in your spare time. There are some questions and an activity around it for the COM 101-502 students. I think some of you are doing both modules, so you will see, of course, the overlap. So you can try to follow that activity in your study guide. So essentially the 4 quadrants of the window, let me maybe actually put it up so we have a visual. Okay, no, it's fine. The 4 quadrants of the window basically represents 4 parts about you. So as one gets bigger, the others get smaller. So if you're filling out I really must actually put it up. I think it'll help to put it up. Okay, so I'm just going to put it up as I talk through it, because I think that might help us a lot better. Okay, so as the one window sort of gets bigger, and that's the things that you know about yourself, things that others know about you. So this is the level where we're most comfortable with disclosing, and the things that we're most comfortable disclosing, that window gets bigger, and then that means the things that we don't know about ourselves, that window would get smaller, and what other people don't know about us would get smaller, because we're telling them the more we tell them, of course, the more they know. So the hidden box will get smaller. And vice versa, if you're someone that doesn't open up a lot, that doesn't tell people a lot of things, what's known to others will be really small, and what's hidden will be really big. So this block will be really big. So that's sort of how the Johari window operates. It's a nice tool to sort of think about and to do with someone that's close to you, because again, it's your perception of self is not just about yourself, it's also about how you're going to relate and interact and communicate with others. So it's always a nice way to do this with someone close to you, so that you can compare answers for you. So they would answer this, they would sort of fill in the block on your behalf, and you would see like, oh, I do know that you know this about me. So it's not unknown to others, it is actually something that's known. So that's just a nice little tool, but ultimately the importance of all of that is just to say that our perception of self, and the way that others perceive us, has really a huge role to play in the way that we communicate, and the quality of our interactions with others. Okay. Are there any questions around that so far? We also go into, in the same, we are on Unit 2, by the way, for COM 1502, also chats about the communication, the needs, or human needs, interpersonal communication and needs. And this already we touched on with Maslow, and so it sort of touches on the same thing, that communication is set, the purpose of communication is to fulfill a need, and that there are many needs that we have as humans that lie on different levels. So everything that you're going to do, every communication act, has sort of links back to those core needs, whether I realize it on the surface or not. So you think you might just be asking a question, but there's a sort of a human need beneath that question, why you're asking that question, why you're trying to find out that information, and why are you telling your child to clean the house, sort of, you know, there's always sort of the whys. And it reminds me of my little cousin, and I think we all know that kids are quite inquisitive. So you tell them, oh, they ask why, and you tell them, and they ask, but why that, and why that? And it's quite frustrating, but it forces us to go a little bit deeper to our motivation for things, even the motivation for disclosing certain things. Why are you telling your colleague about your weekend? You know, what is sort of the deeper human need there? Yeah, and it usually is around relationship building, but also satisfying those physiological and safety needs, etc., etc. Okay, we'll also touch on interpersonal communication and assertiveness, but I'm not going to go into that. I will just say that that the presentation of self, is something that we're probably always going to come back to, because of its the role that it plays in our everyday lives, and so the observable communication behavior during, and it is basically the observable communication behavior during interpersonal communication. It really comes up through this, and your textbooks has lots and lots of examples around this, so I'm not going to go into it too much. Okay, I wanted us to also then go into, sorry, I just realized I'm not sharing screen. I'm going to share the PowerPoint again. Just lots of tabs. Okay. So it talks about interpersonal communication, self-disclosure, and interpersonal communication, and how it relates to our needs. So in the video that we just watched, we were presented with 3 scenarios, and I do want us to maybe chat through some of them, and think about if you would would you self-disclose in this situation? Why and why not? And thinking about some of the things that you would consider. We already make decisions every day when when you are speaking to someone, whether it be a close friend, whether it be a colleague, whether it be your partner, and we're always sort of selecting what we're going to say. So yeah, and there are a number of things that we consider when we are doing this sort of selection. As we're talking, you're like, I'm not going to say that. Okay, then you sort of jump over certain details, and there are reasons for that, right? So I think I want us to, just as a quick closing activity, to look at these scenarios and think, would you self-disclose in this situation? If so, why would you disclose? If not, why would you not disclose? And what are the things that you would consider before deciding to disclose or not disclose? So we can just read the scenario there. It did come up in the video. And then maybe type in the chat, yes, no, and what you would consider in those situations. So the first one was about Mark, who wants to end his relationship with his girlfriend. He is overseas and has met someone else he's interested in and has started seeing. So he will be returning shortly, but he wants to break up with his girlfriend over the phone and tell her he has met someone else. If you were Mark, would you disclose this information or not? Nazarene.
Hello. Yeah, it's Nazreen. I would say that he definitely needs to disclose what he's doing because he's already cheating on his girlfriend. So there's already lots of dishonesty. And the other thing, Ms. Mayoma, I can't see the conversation, so I'm unable to type anything in the messages. I'm not too sure why.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. So I was gonna say I'll put something in the chat, but then you said you can't see in the chat. Okay, I will message you after the session and just pop you the email address so that you can just contact the CTN TUT at unisa.ac.za, and they should be able to assist you. I think it may have to do with the way you logged in, perhaps. I'm not sure. But thanks for your contribution. So you're saying he should definitely disclose, because, and I think you're noting a moral reason there, right? That he's cheating already, which is a moral, like sort of already breaking the trust of that relationship. Okay, anyone else? Mitch, is that an old hand or a new hand? So how much should he tell her? Because I think what the question is asking is, so he wants to break up with her over the phone. So I think he has decided already that he will break up with her. But I think it's like, how much information should he give? Is it really necessary for him to give her all the information? Or should he just say, hey, it's not working anymore, you know? So I think these are the types of things we think about. How much details do you give someone? Is it all necessary? Is it going to do more harm than good? Kolewa says the sooner the better, so you might as well disclose while he's away. Okay. And then it also makes me think about, isn't it better to have this kind of conversation in person? Because he is coming, he will be returning shortly, is what we're told. So in terms of effective communication, I would think it's better to have conversations like these in person. But again, that's why we said it's so subjective, because we're all coming from it, from our different backgrounds, different perspectives. And so there's no right or wrong answer. Old hand, but he should disclose, he should be completely transparent about the relationship. Okay. Great, thanks for the contributions. I almost think that in many cases, one would break up with her, which I think is good, but then maybe not go into too much detail, because if this is someone that is your girlfriend, of course you care about her and you know that it's going to hurt her. So maybe rather just a breakup than a breakup and saying I've met someone else, because we understand the implication that that has on the other person. They will start questioning themselves and think about where they lack, and that affects then their self-esteem and their concept of self, etc., etc. But yeah, it is quite a complex situation. Okay, next one is about the mother of 2 teenage children, 1 boy, 1 girl. She's been feeling guilty because of an affair she had many years ago while her husband was working outside of South Africa. They have now worked through the affair, so husband and wife they're okay. They had and are now happily married. Her husband is no longer working away from home. So she wants to confess this affair to her children and relieve her guilt. Should she or should she not disclose? So here I'm thinking about the people that she wants to disclose to, and is it effective to disclose to the children? What are we thinking? Nazarene, go ahead.
Hi, sorry, yes, me again. I think she should not disclose because I think she's just going to land up hurting her children unnecessarily. Whatever she's done in the past, it was between her and her husband, and I think she should just live with the guilt. I'm not sure. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's a valid point. I was also thinking that because, and I think it's important that they mention that these are teenage children.
Yes.
So there's a lot that comes with that. I mean, I don't have teenage children, but I can assume that there's a lot that comes with that. And if the relationship that she has with her husband, that's of course an IU relationship, that has been mended and they've worked through that, it seems not necessary to bring it to the children. But I mean, yeah, so I would agree with you there. But again, someone else could have a completely different perspective.
Definitely.
Yeah. Okay, and then the final one was about Jason. So Jason is gay and has been having a relationship with another man for the past few months. He has never had the courage to tell his parents. They are all going away on a family holiday and will be together for the first time in years. Jason plans to share the information regarding his sexuality with all of them on the trip. Should Jason disclose or not? Eric, we haven't heard from you today. What are your thoughts? I'll put it to the whole group.
Can I go ahead?
Sure, go ahead.
I think he should disclose it with his family. Because at the end of the day, if he's looking to pursue this relationship with this guy, and thinking about long term, I would think that he'd want to let he should let his family know if he's looking to pursue the relationship long term. Because at the end of the day, the boyfriend's going, or his boyfriend will need to be integrated into the family, for certain things. I don't think he should disclose it to his entire family at all. Then maybe just his parents or, siblings and things like that, but not everyone. And as time goes on, just introduce his boyfriend slowly but surely until everyone knows.
Should he disclose on the trip?
I would say yes, but only to those that he feels most comfortable with. Maybe just close family, parents, siblings. But then again, doesn't give us any indication of whose family.
Yeah, true. And Kolewa says this will not be the right platform to disclose. Believe in privacy and respecting the other party, and wouldn't want to find out such in front of the whole world. Yes, I think that goes again to Mitch's point that we don't know who the family is. Is it just his parents on the trip, or is it extended family as well? Are there siblings there? And also the timing. So these are all the things I think we think about when we are in a conversation with someone and we're sharing and we're thinking about, should I disclose this? You think about the timing, you think about who's in the room. I've had many times where I wanted to share something with a close friend, but there was another person in the room. And so I decided at that moment not to disclose. So I knew that I was going to disclose this information to this person, but not in the presence of someone else, because I don't have the same type of relationship with the other person in the room. So I think you consider things like timing, you consider things like the people that are in the room, or the listeners that are in the room, the way that it's going to be, that he's also going to disclose it is important. So I think the point that we're wanting to make here is that it really varies. It's really dependent on the context, and there's so much things that that you take into consideration in everyday conversations as you're talking to people, because as we're communicating, we're always disclosing. Even in this session, I've disclosed things about myself, probably without even knowing. No, actually with knowing, right? Because then I was also thinking about, okay, what kind of examples can I give that would be appropriate for this context, right? There's certain things I wouldn't disclose in this on this platform, because it's not the right space, it's not the right time, it's not people that I have a close relationship with, right? So even as you're engaging with your colleagues, we're always making these decisions. It's almost unconscious, but I think what I will take from this session, and just in closing, is this point around interpersonal communication, starting with self first, having that strong concept of self and self-concept, who you are, how you interact with yourself, and then how that spreads out into the way that we interact with others, and understanding that the core of communication is to satisfy various needs. So that need for community, the need for love, for affection, and then also the basic needs for food and shelter and employment, etc., etc. So there's always a purpose to our communication, and ultimately we want to be and are always mindful of all the different elements that are at play when we are having a conversation. It's never just, oh, I'm asking for information, oh, I'm telling this person to. There's always a little bit more, and I hope that from this session we're able to take that from it. Okay, so are there any questions or comments as we close? Before we all run out, there is a chat. There is a message in the chat. I'll just read it out, because I know Nazreen, you can't see. So Adele said that Dear students, use this link to get to the schedule with the sessions. You can join a session from there and go to the recordings of this session by clicking the tab Notes and Recordings. Okay, so that is for those of you who want to go back and watch the recording, or if a fellow classmate couldn't make it, you can just tell them that they can find the link, or you can actually just get this link and send it to them. And this is also the link that you would use to join the session. So you don't always have to go into your emails to find the link to the sessions. You can just maybe bookmark this link right here in the chat and use that to access the sessions every week. So yeah, if there are no other questions, I think I'll say thank you for great discussion, and we will see each other next week. Have a great evening. Nazarene, so I just wanted to say the email is just CTNTUT.
Yes, I have that. Thank you so much.
Okay, so you can just email them and just yeah, I think they'll be able to assist with that.
Thank you, Ms. Yoma. It was a great session. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Have a great evening. Bye. Hi, Adele.
get so annoyed with the amount of technical debt we have, you know. I spend my entire day trying to do something outside my ticket, and I've not really even started what I'm supposed to do on the ticket itself. Which it's annoying. But it's not that I can do about it.
Okay. But were you able to log time on that ticket though?